In 1845, the state of Tennessee put several men on trial for a serious crime, casting a ballot. Prosecutors argued that these dark-skinned men had African ancestry, which made their participation in the election illegal. Rather than claiming whiteness, the defense argued the men were Portuguese, a highly unorthodox strategy in a racially segregated courtroom. After hearing the arguments, the judge agreed. He legally designated the men as Portuguese, securing their right to vote. These men belonged to an isolated community scattered across the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina. Outsiders called them Melungeons, a group of people whose appearance defied the strict racial categories of the 19th century. Because they didn't easily fit into existing boxes, neighbors invented elaborate folktales to explain their origins. Rumors spread that they were descendants of Turkish galley slaves, survivors of the lost colony of Roanoke, or even one of the lost tribes of Israel. This identity functioned as a high-stakes legal game for survival, far more consequential than a mere quirk of Appalachian folklore. Over a century later, a comprehensive DNA project led by researcher Jack Goins finally put the Turkish and Roanoke myths to rest. Genetic testing revealed that the original core families were a mixture of European and sub-Saharan African descent. Their ancestors were free people of color, tracing back to the earliest colonial days. In those early colonial years, racial lines were somewhat fluid, but as the nation grew, lawmakers began cementing a strict, brutal caste system. The legal standard became known as the one-drop rule. If a person had even a single drop of black blood, the state stripped away their right to vote, own land, or testify in court. Facing total disenfranchisement, these multi-ethnic families packed up and fled west, pushing deep into the remote ridges of the Appalachian frontier to escape the reach of those laws. Once there, they utilized a specific defense mechanism. By claiming an exotic heritage, like Moorish or Portuguese, they created a legal loophole that allowed them to bypass anti-black legislation. This early census document illustrates how that strategy wreaked havoc on government records. You can see the confusion in the columns. Rigid options, free white males, free white females, and all other free persons simply couldn't capture a community that manufactured its own racial identity. These families used exotic histories as a necessary legal loophole to avoid systemic subjugation. Even with occasional legal victories, the reality of their situation was harsh. Melungeon families were deeply ostracized by their neighbors and forced into severe poverty. The pressure intensified in the 1920s with the rise of the American eugenics movement. State officials, like Walter Plecker in Virginia, launched aggressive campaigns to hunt down and reclassify mixed-race individuals, targeting them for forced sterilization and institutionalization. The threat was so severe that parents stopped talking about their heritage altogether. They hid their ancestry from their own children, believing that total secrecy was the only way to keep them safe. When the Great Depression hit, New Deal infrastructure projects finally created an economic escape route. Families packed up and left the mountains for industrial jobs. Migration broke the community's geographic isolation. In new towns, the younger generations could seamlessly blend into the white population, intentionally burying the Melungeon name. To survive the rigid racial laws of America, they had to disappear completely. Their success required their own cultural erasure. By the late 1990s, the original struggle of the Melungeon people was almost entirely forgotten by the general public. Then came the early internet, coinciding with a viral book by an author named N. Brent Kennedy. He aggressively promoted the old folklore, claiming the Melungeons were the literal descendants of Turkish galley slaves. The theory exploded online. Thousands of Americans took to early web forums, eager to claim this newly popularized and highly exotic heritage for themselves. This wave of modern identity shopping stands in sharp contrast to the historical reality. For the original families, the word Melungeon was a dangerous slur, and they fiercely resented being called it. Today, modern Americans who feel culturally disconnected actively seek out an exotic label, pursuing the very thing historical Americans fought desperately to escape. The historical Melungeons were ordinary people navigating an impossible legal system, quite separate from the myths of explorers and lost colonies. Their history shows that race in America is a social construct rather than a biological absolute, where identity becomes the story a people must tell to survive.